Before going to your comment, here is what Reuters reported that the Trump administration is preparing to redirect $1.8 billion in foreign aid toward America First priorities. In the Western Hemisphere, the plan allocates $400 million to several objectives: illegal immigrants, China's growing influence in critical minerals and artificial intelligence, and the last but not the least is what Washington calls the Marxist anti American regimes of Venezuela, Cuba, Bolivia, and Nicaragua. Go ahead, Richard.
All right. I want to remind people that are watching this program of why it makes sense to understand the United States as engaged in a desperate theatrical response to world problems. When the war in Iraq began, in Ukraine began, February of 2022, Mr. Biden, then the president, and many of his top officials went on record, and no major American officials disagreed, that this war would be short, that the ruble would become rubble, that the Russian economy couldn't possibly sustain this and would collapse, and that it might even be possible, some of the more expansive ones, to imagine regime change in Russia, bye-bye, Mr. Putin, and maybe divide Russia up so it was divided into many little countries like the rest of Eastern Europe is. Those were our leaders. The people in power now did not disagree with that assessment. They seconded it. Why is anyone believing the current story? Russia's exhausted. Russia can't continue. We know that that was wrong. The ruble is worth roughly what it was before the war started. It hasn't collapsed or nothing like it. The Russian economy has, according to GDP, United Nations data, has grown faster than the United States' economy for every year of the war, including right now. It turns out the war in Russia has a stimulative effect the way they've managed it. I'm not saying they've managed it beautifully in every regard, but as an economic venture, they've done with the war what the United States did with World War II. Use it to get out of the Depression, to grow faster than they could in the 1930s, which they did. And the Russians have done that also. You could pretend that this isn't so, but it is. And if you pretend it isn't, if you think you can just tell us another story, Russia's exhausted, and we don't remember 3 years ago when you told us that you knew what would happen and it's all wrong, then you're the crazy person, not us. And now about we can win the war, Mr. Zelensky says. Russia is a very serious opponent, very well armed. It has been well armed since the Soviet time, which means at least half a century of military priority. And they were already a reasonably rich country. Let's review American wars. The war in Vietnam was a war between a highly developed military superpower and a poor, backward country, and the United States lost. The war was against the Communist Party of North Vietnam. They are in charge today. They have been in the entire interval, which is now 50 years from 1975. They managed to run a good society. And Vietnam, by the way, is one of the best performing economies in the world, run by the Communist Party, because the United States lost. Now let's go to Afghanistan. That's even poorer than Vietnam. United States against the Taliban. And we lost. Who's in charge of the Taliban today? Sorry, of Afghanistan. The Taliban, not the United States. We didn't win in Iraq, and we're not winning in Ukraine. And instead of that being a weird idea that we're not, that shouldn't be weird to anybody. That's the record we have. We don't win wars, we lose them. Now, we don't mind because it's a stimulus to our economy that we can't afford to do without. But if it is that for us, then it can play that role for Russia, which it is doing, and shouldn't surprise anyone who thinks for a moment about all of this. Now, let me turn for a moment to this thorny question of Europe. Michael keeps reminding us, quite rightly, that the prohibition of the Europeans, which the decision they made to stop buying oil and gas from Russia as part of the great sanction program. I believe their latest iteration, even bigger than before, is the number 19 or the number 20 of sanction packages that they have passed. Russia's doing fine. Europe is a disaster. So bad that the United States, seeing that its problem is China, now looks upon the Europeans as, at worst, a drain on resources, and at best, a source of tribute to help confront China. This puts Europe into an unbelievable decline. Look, it was a declining part of the world economy anyway. The empires were lost a century ago or half a century ago, and they don't know what to do. And they've been outflanked by the United States on one end and by the Chinese and the BRICS on the other. So Europe is in a decline. And the politicians have to explain that to their people. Do they dare say our capitalists haven't been able to keep up with the competitors in US and China? They dare not do that. Their capitalists are what keep them in office. So that's out. Who are they going to blame? Themselves? Never happened. Well, they really have two choices. They could blame the United States. They could. But that's no more doable than blaming their own capitalists. They still depend on the United States. So there's only one candidate left. Russia. Make an enormous noise about the danger of Russia. We have to rearm because of Russia. We have to cut back social welfare because of Russia. We have to decline because Russia, it has to be an endless. What we're watching in Europe is a kind of replication of the American Cold War after World War II. Everything is blamed on Russia to excuse, in the case of the United States, the building up of the American empire, and in the case of Europe, hiding the decline and its causes from its own people. That's all that's going on. The rest is just noise. All right, last point I want to make. The crisis for the United States has to do, in one way, with something which I know will scare people, but I don't know how you can avoid it. A declining empire that once was dominant economically, politically, and militarily, and ideologically. It's losing it economically. We already know that. China and the BRICS is a much larger economic wealth unit in the world economy than the United States and the G7. They crossed the two lines in the year 2020, and the gap has gotten larger every year of the last 5 years. Right? So economically, the United States is no longer dominant. Politically, it isn't either. You know how you can see that? The votes in the UN are lopsided. There are 120 countries on one side and the United States and a few others on the other. More and more and more. You can't control countries in Latin America. You listed. They have to list half a dozen. They used to only have to list Cuba. Now they have to list half a dozen. Why? Because it's spreading there, because the political control of the United States is shrinking. Ideologically, Western private capitalism, which used to be the ideological cover, we are the globalizing force of the world, the private enterprise of bringing the world together, bringing prosperity. Nobody believes that anymore. You had 50 years of the globalization hype be the ideological framework for the country's success. But the losers from all of that, above all here in the United States, have transformed the domestic politics here to support a Trump in office who expresses the anger and rage of those who lost from globalization. In large parts of the United States, calling someone a globalist has the same political force that used to go with the word communist. Wow. Politically, that's the ideologically, that's the framework. It doesn't work. The United States' endorsement and funding of Israel in Gaza, that is undermined. What position? The Americans are in favor of freedom? What? The freedom of all those people in Gaza to die? What freedom are you talking about? And then the ultimate irony, which we're going to be talking about, I predict, in the months ahead on this program. In recent weeks, the United States government took a position, 10% of the Intel Corporation, with an option for another 5%. That's state capitalism. You know what that is? That's the act by the United States of copying the Chinese, who have a huge state enterprise sector. Roughly half the Chinese economy is state enterprise. Intel is now a state enterprise. If the workers at Intel go on strike, will Mr. Trump, who is the major shareholder now, call in ICE to take care of that problem? Wow. Mr. Trump blocked the sale of certain computer chips to China. NVIDIA and AMD, two major producers of those chips, explained to Mr. Trump the Chinese are major users of chips because they are an enormous economy. And the BRICS is even bigger. We can't make a profit if we can't sell chips to them. Everything we did was based on that. Oh, Mr. Trump said, okay, cancel the order, but you must give me, the government, 15% of the revenue you get from selling chips to the Chinese. That's the deal we have now. Okay, that's the sincerest form of flattery that the Chinese economy could ask for. The Americans, without admitting it, without talking about it, are copying. And the reason to why? Easy to see. The IMF currently estimates the United States economy will grow about 1.5% GDP growth in 2025, down from the 2+ it had promised earlier. China is estimating 5%. India, 7%, which were their numbers last year. they expect it again. You can't sustain the delusions of the United States when the rest of the world, your adversaries, India, China, in the BRICS, are growing 3 times faster than you are, 3 times more capable of doing what they're doing. I recently saw a map of Africa, and the map compared 2010 to today, so 15 years. And the map showed the percentage, the number of countries, they were marked in red, whose major trading partner was the United States versus China. Then it showed it today. Reversal. The United States was the major trading partner for most of the countries, the overwhelming majority of countries in Africa at the beginning. And that role has been completely switched. And now, for most of the countries of Africa, the vast majority, the major trading partner is China. I mean, how many signs on the wall do we need to present to a reasonable person to understand where the world is going? So that leaves the military. And the war in Ukraine raises a lot of questions that Michael summarized. The scarcity of weapons, using them up, giving them to the Ukrainians, because Mr. Zelensky seems to have become an icon for this European craziness about Russia. I don't know what Mr. Putin's plans are, and I know that you, the listener, and you, the Europeans, you don't know either. The best we can do is look at what we see, gather the evidence, and make a reasonable estimation. The explanation for why Ukraine that the Russians give make a certain sense. Are there ulterior motives we don't know? Probably. I don't know what they are. But the notion that Russia has any reason to invade the rest of Europe, it has less reason now than ever before. And Russia has not had a habit of invading Europe. Not at all. It's the other way around. Napoleon, World War I, Hitler, and the great invasions went the other way from west to east. They dwarf on every dimension movement the other way. So stop. This is a dangerous game. A declining empire in a desperate situation, looking to its military to solve the problem. And doing that after you've just lost 5 wars against much less capable opponents than Russia is that verges on the crazy.